Here we go. Today is Sunday, July 24th, 2016, otherwise known as Christmas Eve in July. And this is episode 166 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kellett.
Hello, Jerry, and I'll have whatever you're having. Christmas Eve in...
Well, tomorrow is Christmas in July.
What?
Today is Christmas Eve in July.
What?
Go with it, man.
Is this like a kid thing that I don't understand because I don't have kids?
No, it's a sale thing. It's a capitalism thing.
Wait, they're selling kids?
Get on the program. So before we get started, the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. So, I guess before we get started, I had a couple of book recommendations I wanted to make to everybody. So, first one is Algorithms to Live By. It's really, really good.
That sounds exciting.
Actually, it is. It is.
And what's it about?
So it is a book written about computer science related algorithms and how they relate to real world. So it's actually pretty cool, talking about queuing and the part I'm almost at the end. It is talking about relating IP backoffs or Ethernet backoffs to real world situations. So it's pretty cool. And then the other book is called Peak. And that book is about, how to describe it. It's about how to become an expert. So if you've ever heard about Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule.
Which basically is it takes 10,000 hours of doing something repeatedly to become an expert at it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was made popular by Malcolm Gladwell in his I think it was 2008, 2009, his book called Outliers. Mm-hmm. And that comment was actually based off of the research done by the author of this book called Peak. And I'm not saying that the author of Peak calls Malcolm Gladwell full of it, but I'm not saying he doesn't either. Basically, the 10,000 hour rule sounds really simple, but it's not that simple. And so it's really worth reading the book. 10,000 hours is not what it seems, and but there are definite lessons to be learned there. The secret is just about anybody can get really good at just about anything. That's to cut to the chase.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, go read those books.
I've not been reading anything along those lines. I just finished a book about how basically the U.S. military was secretly testing basically Russian MiGs in the 70s and 80s out at Tonopah and Groom Lake, and that's what I read lately. So,
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, but not, maybe not for our audience, but maybe some. I don't know. I read that stuff, I guess. I need to read more of your smarty smart book stuff, I guess.
All right, so getting into our stories tonight, we have an update on the continuing saga of the Swift hacking debacle. And this one comes from bankinfosecurity.com. And it talks about a report from Reuters, which did a really thorough investigation into the happenings that led up to an immediate aftermath of that $81 million that was stolen. There were a lot of details in here that I hadn't heard of, and just thought some of these things might be of interest. So one of the most notable things is that in the initial report there was a mention that the way this was caught was the attackers had misspelled one of the recipients, and it was caught by Deutsche Bank, and the word was foundation instead of foundation. I don't remember what the foundation's name was, and we made some jokes about, isn't that guy dumb, and he probably is at the bottom of a lake right now. But actually, as it turns out, that apparently didn't really happen that way, at least. And
once again, proving that initial press reports are incorrect.
Yes.
So we have to be careful about, until the full story comes out. But
right.
not that stops us from speculating anyway, but this is another example of that.
Right. So kind of cut to the chase. The attackers still don't know who they are. Had probed around in the Bank of Bangladesh's network for, I guess, a couple of days, maybe to a couple of weeks, and they waited until a Thursday evening in Bangladesh to start issuing transactions, because Friday is part of the weekend in Bangladesh, but it's a workday in the U.S. And the transactions were actually submitted to the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. And interestingly, the first, I don't know if it was the first batch or at least the first transaction that was inspected by the Federal Bank in New York, Federal Reserve Bank in New York, was misformatted and was rejected, and was noted why it was rejected, and the attackers reformatted it and resubmitted it, and then it was accepted. And there were 35 transactions submitted in all over the course of a couple of hours. Interestingly, the Federal Reserve Bank doesn't actually apparently apply any kind of fraud detection to these transactions. They're just handled, and then at some point in the future, they go back and apparently look at them for compliance with different U.S. sanction programs,
that's the serious thing they mainly care about, it seems, is the sanctions and the sanction laws, not necessarily fraud. It seems to me that,
right,
reading this, that the SWIFT network was sort of at the central point built to completely trust other messages coming into the system.
Yes.
In other words, if I got a message in,
yep,
I just trust it.
Correct.
Basically.
Right.
And as long as it's formatted correctly and whatnot, most of the other nodes will just sort of process the message, and then perhaps a review later might catch something odd, but that seems a little late.
Yeah, that's right. So the thing that apparently caused this to jump the tracks for the attackers was that one of the recipients, I guess it was on the fourth or fifth transaction, had a recipient with a address that had the word Jupiter in it, and apparently the Federal Reserve Bank in New York applies some kind of an automated, and this, by the way, is not uncommon. I've seen the other side of this. Applies an analysis or a filter looking for certain characteristics that might be indicative of a sanctioned party. And apparently the word Jupiter is associated with some boycotted Iranian oil tankers and other Iranian things. And so that prompted someone at the Federal Reserve Bank to go back and take a closer look, and they realized that all is not good, and so they put the kibosh on further transactions. And actually then they contacted the Bank of Bangladesh through the SWIFT network. Apparently SWIFT lets the different parties communicate with each other through the network. However, if you recall, Bank of Bangladesh had their system set up so that any messages from SWIFT were printed out on their printer. However, the attackers had installed some malware that disabled the printer, and so the messages were not coming through.
Once again, showing that they completely trusted the system.
Yes.
That there was no even contemplation of the concept that somebody could corrupt the system or block messaging.
Right.
Completely trusted.
So anyway, the Bank of Bangladesh, I guess one of the higher ups came in on Friday and didn't see anything amiss. Anyway, eventually they figured out that um, their Swift terminal wasn't printing things, and so they did some work and rebooted it. All of a sudden, they got all these messages, including two from the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, saying, what the heck is going on? And so they, at this point, it was the weekend, and the Bank of Bangladesh employees tried desperately to contact the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. However, there were no 24-hour contacts available. They could only find an email address that was monitored 8 by 5 during the week, so business hours during the week, which the Federal Reserve Bank didn't get until Monday. And yeah, this was pretty bad. And then on the other side, in the Bank of Bangladesh side, apparently after it became known that money was transferred, the person responsible for the SWIFT, it's not the hierarchy is not quite clear to me, but one of the ministers in the bank who was aware of this didn't advise the higher ups, right? The head of the bank, and so I think he ended up promptly resigning after that, if memory serves. It's that's just a couple of things, a couple of takeaways. One is, it's really a really bad idea to apply so much trust in a system like that. I mean, you have this very distributed network of endpoints where each endpoint is managed by somebody else, and you're being asked to implicitly trust the authenticity of the messages that you receive from these other endpoints. And that just seems like a really kind of outmoded and probably never was a great idea to begin with. And then the other one is that you only have, it just boggles my mind that the only mechanism they had in place was to communicate with each other was through the same network, which would create the problem to begin with.
Well, reading the article, they had other mechanisms, but it appeared being the weekend and overnight and time zone issues that there was a massive delay in that sort of communication, and that the primary mode of communication was within the Swift network because it's a feature.
Yes.
But yeah, like many things, I think this is a failure of imagination of the way that the system could be corrupted, and it was designed for ease of use and facilitating quick money transfers and such, and the only real controls that were, at least to our external non-expert eyes, were around things like sanction controls.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, that's obviously going to change, but this is a symptom of a common problem, which is that these systems are designed without taking paranoid security view into account.
Right.
And so, we're over there going, well, duh. And, but businesses are often have this idea, well, you guys are just paranoid and you're making life difficult and we have to get work done.
That's right.
And, maybe 8 times out of 10, they're right. And they get away with it for a really, really long time. But then we can stand here after and go, well, hey, if you had just done X, Y, Z. But frankly, that's not how business is working right now.
Right.
The other thing is we speculated really heavily for a long time that the attackers must have had a ton of insider information because of how complex and unique this environment is and how they had to format messages just right. But now from this latest report, that's not the case. It looks like they were in there doing a recon for over a month and even got the first batch of messages wrong, but were given another chance to try.
Yeah. Yep.
So it looks like these guys were not insiders as we had earlier speculated. They just had plenty of time to dwell in the environment and do plenty of recon.
Yeah, and I think they took full advantage of that implicit trust of the endpoint, because one of the things that comes out in this article is that the Bank of Bangladesh is really quite furious with the New York Fed because,
understandably so.
Yeah, well, because the transactions were unlike any others. I mean, the first one was completely corrupted. Like that should have been a signal, and then most of the rest of them were were addressed to individuals. And then they said that the Bank of Bangladesh averaged 2 transactions a month. I think it was a month. Or maybe it was a day. I don't remember which. I'm getting old. Anyway, it was way more volume than they normally get, regardless.
Right.
And so that should have also triggered some kind of an alert, but it didn't. And in the article here, they point out that the New York Fed handles $800 billion worth of transactions a day, and so even this $1 billion is kind of noise. It's just not a big thing.
And I guess it goes back to what was the original agreement contractually between Bangladesh and the New York Fed. Did the New York Fed sign up to secure against this sort of problem? Or is the Bangladesh folks trying to put that requirement onto the New York Fed after the fact? It's kind of like you look at a managed service provider and you sign up for the managed service provider to manage your firewalls. But does that mean that your managed service provider now needs to be responsible if you don't patch something and you get popped?
Right.
So it's an interesting question of what is the New York Fed or the SWIFT network or whatever truly responsible for. And we saw a lot of notices after the fact of the SWIFT going, hey guys, protect your damn systems.
Right. Well, I guess we'll get a chance to find out what the legal view is, because apparently the Bank of Bangladesh is in the process of filing a lawsuit against both SWIFT and the New York Fed. So,
well, if it goes like most cases, it will probably just be settled, and we won't necessarily know.
Possibly so. So let's move on to our next story, which comes from Vice.com, and the title is "Ransomware Gang Claims Fortune 500 Company Hired Them to Hack the Competition." This was a really interesting story. So F-Secure, in the process of doing some investigation, were, I guess they dispatched one of their employees to pose as someone who had been infected by a piece of ransomware known as Jigsaw. Jigsaw's a very common piece of ransomware used by potentially lots of different attackers. But anyway, they called the help desk of one of these ransomware campaigns, basically acting as a clueless person. And obviously being from Finland, the help desk agent, if you will, said that he was surprised that this person in Finland had been infected with this malware, because the customer who had paid them to run the malware campaign hadn't included anyone in Finland, and then went on to say that in fact it was a Fortune 500 company who had paid for the ransomware campaign and had apparently given a specific list of targets, and this person wasn't one of the targets, so that they were not quite sure how that person ended up being infected. And apparently also said that the purpose of it was to delay the operations of the victim company. So the implication here is that one Fortune 500 company has paid a ransomware outfit to target a competitor with ransomware to lock up some files and delay their operations for some reason, right? I mean,
Well, it's quoted in the article. The purpose was just to lock files to delay a corporation's production time to allow our clients to introduce a similar product into the market first.
There you go.
Which is really quite fascinating when you think about it.
Yes.
But of course, when you lay down with pigs, right?
Indeed.
Be careful who you hire.
So there's not a ton of no new revelations, except for the fact that apparently there are possible new motives that we hadn't really considered before. So the whole malware and cyber crime as a service thing may have deeper deeper roots than it might otherwise seem.
Well, it's kind of like a production DOS in many ways, right?
Exactly.
It can be a methodology. So now you combine this with the concept of many large botnets that have already pre-infiltrated many different organizations, and then you offer out, hey, are you a competitor of Bob's Budget Bait and Dial-In, and you want to slow down his new offering? Well, we've already got boxes inside. Give us a call.
Exactly.
It's
That's right. That's right. They
It's
just lay in wait.
it's just an interesting development, which is why I rebuild my OS every single day.
Seems like a good idea.
In fact, I even melt down the motherboard. I redraw the circuits,
Wow.
reprint the CPU. I don't trust a damn thing.
Hardcore. You must get up early in the morning to do all that.
It's true. It's true. It's tough. But, that's why I have coffee. Oh, that's right. You're not drinking caffeine anymore.
Shut up.
Tasty caffeine.
Shut up.
Coursing through my veins.
Yes. So
It's okay. Just do your 12-step program. You'll be fine.
yes, thank you very much. So anyhow, my lack of caffeine is making it hard to focus. Anyway,
So, ransomware as a service to disrupt competitors. New thing. Exciting.
Yep.
And
watch
yet
this space.
yet another fun thing to worry about.
Watch this space. Don't get any ideas, guys.
Mhm.
And then our final story from today comes from Lexology.com.
For the record, it's been a light news week in the InfoSec space, at least according to us. So
Well, it's the run-up to DEF CON Black Hat besides LV. So,
or as some call it, the Summer Hacker Camp,
yeah, security summer camp. That's right.
which I won't be at and you won't be at.
I know.
But we will, little teaser, we will be in October in New York.
That's right.
And we'll talk about that after the story.
That's right. And I will be at DerbyCon too. So there you go.
Yeah, I'll be trying to get married.
So here's the deal. The title is Cyber Security Response to Recent Wholesale Payment System Breaches, and I think we talked about this maybe a couple of weeks ago, but in response to the SWIFT attacks, the FFIC, which is the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council here in the United States, issued some guidance, and they basically said, secure your payment crap, or your messaging payment crap.
That's pretty much exactly what they said too.
Yeah, and and it was very interesting because I always love their releases, and when they end it with, this does not create any new regulatory obligations, which basically is like, you should have been doing this all along, dumbass.
It's kind of like their version of I'm not a lawyer.
Yes.
Right.
But I thought there were some good things in here, but at the same time, there are some things that I wanted to talk about. So let's go through some of their recommendations, and then the SEC also made some recommendations too. So the first recommendation is to conduct ongoing information security risk assessments to identify, prioritize, and assess risks to the financial institution's critical systems, and to address emerging threat intelligence regarding online accounts. Financial institutions should also consider requiring the third-party service providers to conduct similar assessments.
So somebody read somebody's marketing.
Yeah, and I think that the theme that you're going to get from me on all of these is that what that means to me is very different than what it means to you. Right. And if I can hire company A to come out and do a risk assessment, and then I can hire company B, and they will end up with very, very, very different things. This is all non-deterministic stuff.
Yep.
And that is the problem. Their next item is to maintain up-to-date protection and detection systems to perform security monitoring, prevention, and risk mitigation. Well, I'll stop there for a second. So does up-to-date protection and detection mean like that I should make sure that I have my AV DAT files up to date, or does that mean that I need to keep buying the next gen endpoint protection?
Right.
What does that even mean? And then firewall rules should also be configured properly and reviewed periodically. That one made me see red.
It's like somebody read the back of a CISSP book. Is kind of what this feels like to me.
Yes. Yes. What is a properly configured firewall?
Well, see, that is the challenge because that's different for everybody. How do you know? How do you justify? And we could talk for hours about how you run a firewall properly. In and of itself is its own art. But at the end of the day, it's about knowing what rules should be in place for appropriate business risk. The problem with this entire conversation is what is appropriate business risk for an individual organization?
And do they fully understand the implications of the
Right.
decisions they're making? Right. So
Absolutely.
I mean, my experience has been the answer to that question is often no.
So for most people, when they do a firewall review, they look and see, all right, here's all the firewall changes that happened last year. Look, we've got valid requests for all these. Good to go. See you. Bye.
That's right. That's right. There's no real assessment of whether that
And yet,
is good.
firewalls can be so extremely powerful for reducing your attack surface.
Right.
But it takes a lot of time and effort to run them properly, and it slows down business. So a lot of time firewalls just get in the way, and they end up far more open and loosely run than they should be because businesses want to go fast.
That's true. And if you're going to review them periodically, the less rules they have, the easier that goes.
That's right.
So the next recommendation is to protect against unauthorized access to financial institution systems by limiting the number of access credentials distributed across the institution and regularly review access rights to confirm individuals have appropriate access.
Really?
What is appropriate access?
So let me point out for the record, if I were writing these, the first thing I would say is have an incredibly robust vulnerability management program with aggressive patching SLAs. It's the first thing I would say.
Yeah.
Patch your crap, and I mean everything. That stops a good 70% of problems right there.
But uptime. Patching is dangerous.
I get it, but
Patching
at the
is
current look,
dangerous.
I'm not saying this will last forever, but for the current environment, just if there's any one thing you can do, patching is probably the one thing. If you only had to pick one thing, frickin' patch. All right, so unauthorized access by limiting the number of access credentials distributed. Really? So,
What's the right number?
right. And if I only
42.
So by following this, I'm like, oh, I should only have 3 credentials. Here, Bob, give your team one of these credentials.
Yep.
Now, there is logic here, but it could be something along the lines of, audit the number of people with access and how they access it, and run behavioral anomaly detection of when and how they log in with those, and enable 2-factor and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. The challenge I have with these is they're platitudes, right? They're non-specific, unhelpful platitudes that sound like they're conveying knowledge, and they leave people with an understanding that, oh, I'm smarter now, I know how to protect my environment. But you don't.
So they're kind of like the equivalent of those posters you see in workrooms of like some pretty picture with some phrase underneath to motivate you. But for information
Yes,
security.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Try your best.
Yes.
Hang in there. Courage.
Tough it out.
Think like an entrepreneur.
Right. Let's see. Establish controls around critical systems and test the controls regularly. Appropriate controls include, but are not limited to, access controls, segregation of duties, audits, fraud detection, and should be implemented according to associated risks.
So if you know what that means and can actually translate that into actionable items, you don't need this list.
I think that is, you just captured my entire problem with these lists. It's that in order to action these concepts, you have to have people or a person or a team or something that understands at a very deep level what these mean in the environment and what's needed and what the risks are, because it's not going to be the same for everybody. And
Right.
I'll be honest, one of the problems I see time and again is companies making accepting risks and not really understanding what that means. Like they think they understand the risk that they have accepted, but they really don't. And and that's a in a lot of respects that's a failure of security, right? Because it's not a business person isn't really going to have a deep handle on the implications of those risks. Somebody's got to make it real. And I'll be honest, a lot of that failure falls on the technical people that I've seen, and that's a big problem. We've got to figure that out. And it doesn't help that the business people also control the types and number of of those technical people. So I
But look at,
suppose.
let's say you're a CIO or you're a CFO who owns the IT organization, and you get this list. How is this useful to you? You're going to go to your CISO or your security group and say, "Are we doing this stuff?"
Yeah, are we? I want my
Right.
firewalls reviewed periodically, and I want the report on my desk tomorrow.
Right. Exactly.
And you're
Uh,
still going to get hacked, and then you're going to say, well, but how come my firewall review didn't catch that?
right.
Well, that port was open because somebody asked for it to be
And
opened.
let's be honest, attackers have moved beyond going after the front door.
Yeah,
Firewalls achieved their goal. It made attackers shift to another vector.
right. Yep. Let's see what's next. Confirm business continuity planning enables the institution to quickly recover and maintain payment processing operations. Um, the one thing I see there, by the way, and I run into this a whole lot, is that, especially with the FFIC, and I think to their credit, they have been kind of leading the charge on trying to inject the concept of cyber risk into business continuity and disaster recovery, because a lot of organizations rely on geographical separation for their BC and DR operations, which is great if you're worried about volcanoes and hurricanes and floods and tornadoes and fires and things like that. But it doesn't work really well if you're worried about the person that has compromised your systems and is currently corrupting your SAN, and that corruption is being replicated real time across to your hot site.
Or your ransomware that's currently encrypting your files that are currently being replicated over to your hot site.
Right. Exactly.
Correct.
You got it. And so that's I think this is an area where I think we have a lot of learning to do. Provide regular mandatory information security awareness training programs.
Let's beat on that deceased equine for a little while.
Nope. Engage in information or industry information sharing. Well,
How exactly is that going? I mean, this is a common refrain that we've heard for years and years and years, and there's valid use for this. But what information sharing? What industry? What should I be sharing? How do I engage? What does that mean?
well, the government has picked up the intelligence sharing drum, and they are beating it to death. And I'm to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the end game is there. There's
I,
definitely some
there is
appropriate
value, but you've got to have a really mature, robust organization to know how to deal with it and use it.
for it to be useful. That's right.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of organizations are there, and that's my concern. Is that you get a lot of these government agencies banging the drum, saying you got to share, you got to participate in these information sharing arrangements, and we're like, look, we don't have firewalls,
Right. I mean, let's
or,
focus on the basics here.
we have the free version of Malwarebytes. So yeah. Then the let's see. other organization was this? This was the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures issued some additional guidance, which they have a framework that has 5 pillars. One of them was cyber governance, which basically is establishing ownership, so senior executive management ownership. And I think this one, by the way, is played to death, right? I mean, how many times do you open up any freaking website, whether it's CSO or Wired or Google News, right? And, cyber is now a boardroom thing. And
which means they're just asking the CISO, hey, what are we doing about that cyber?
Makes me yawn. Because cyber stuff is not decided, it's not solved at the boardroom.
Jenny, I need a coffee with extra cyber.
Identification is their next pillar, and that's basically identifying your important business functions, and then rating them, and kind of how they relate to each other, and figuring out, kind of basically prioritizing your protection around those. I see with that though, a lot of organizations don't really understand the interrelations. They think they do, but they don't. And Target and Home Depot were both great examples of that, right? They think they understand how their systems interrelate, but they in fact do not. Protection, that's a pretty obvious.
But on the identification one, I do somewhat agree there that having a good inventory and inventory management and understanding your assets and environment is foundational.
No question. Absolutely. I guess my point is that, in addition to the foundational aspect of having that inventory, what the drum they're on is prioritizing. And
yeah.
And my observation is that organizations don't a lot of times have a great understanding of so I've prioritized this particular thing is like really critical, but this other thing over there, that's not critical. But at the end of the day, one doesn't work without the other, and it's that level of detail that I think often gets lost.
I would agree.
So protection, this is kind of goes back, right? So protection is not deterministic, right? It is a, I don't even know what it is. It's a hope and a wish. And therein lies the problem, right?
Because no, you just have to align with business practices, industry business practices. Align with industry best practices, and you'll be fine. Just go do what your peer is doing. Which, by the way, that drives me batshit crazy when executives are like, "What's our competitor doing? We should do that."
Because they've got it right. They've got it nailed.
Like that is exact. And I've seen this over and over again, where companies ask consulting firms or whatever, measure me against my peers.
Which, by the way, to go off on a tangent for a second, is really funny, because in every other context, they think of their competition as a bunch of knuckle-dragging monkeys.
Agreed. But in this case, what they're looking at is trying to measure the wisdom of crowds for the appropriate level of cyber investment. And so if they think they're close to in line, they're being competitive. They don't want to overspend.
Yeah, that's true.
But again, it goes back to the fundamental assumption that their competitors are doing it right, and that they have the same level of risk tolerance and everything else. And yeah, it's a dangerous metric, and I don't agree with it at all. But it is absolutely asked for by a lot of executives out there.
Yeah,
I know, off on a tangent there.
No, it's okay. I think that back on the protection one, the issue here is this again requires really talented and knowledgeable people who have
a willingness of executive leadership to listen to the recommendations and advice of those talented people and potentially change business process.
Well, that's true, but I guess my point is that there's one thing if a business if a security person comes to an executive and says, we need to do A, B, and C, and the executive says, well, we can't afford A, but we'll do B and C, and then you get compromised by doing, by not doing A. It's a different story than if your security person is completely oblivious to A and just comes
Agreed.
forward and says, well, we should do B and C. And I think that's what we see a lot of over and over and over and over again. And part of the reason I think is kind of goes back to things that we've talked about in the past, which is that security and IT in general is like a trade craft. It's like building tables. It's it's not.
So really, we should be apprenticing at the Cyber Forge.
It's not a bad idea. I mean, if it weren't such a rapidly evolving, technology-wise, if it weren't so rapidly evolving, I think that would make a lot more sense. It is the very fact that it's evolving so quickly that makes, I think, the apprenticeship model really difficult to make sense. But otherwise, I think that would be a good idea. And then finally, detection. That is I guess a little more, I suppose, a little more deterministic. But again, I think this is an area where we see a lot of outsourcing and a lot of blinky boxes in the detection space.
Yeah, and these are all areas that take a great deal of time and effort to mature.
Yeah.
Buying a sim and buying all these tools and getting them stood up and run properly and having institutional knowledge of how to run them and tuning out the false positives. And, it's usually a year to get that stuff up and running properly.
Show me the return on investment for our sim by tomorrow.
Right.
Anyway, there's a little more in the story, but I'm getting tired and cranky. So let's talk about our conference coming up in October.
Indeed. Jerry and I are going to be at the Riley Security Conference in New York at the end of October. I think it is like October 30th through like November 2nd or something like that.
Yeah.
In New York. Jerry and I will be running the Ignite track, which I think is happening one of the evenings from like 6 to 9 or something like that, which should be fun. It's 5-minute prezos with auto advanced slides. I think they're going to open up the call for papers for that in August, and Jerry and I will be hosting, which should be a good time, we hope.
That's right.
And we'll be
come and heckle.
bumming around. That's right. We'll be bumming around the conference the rest of the time, hopefully as well. So yeah, that'll be fun. And I'll be freshly married, so
that's
sorry
right.
to disappoint all the listeners who are pining away for me.
Do you know how many tickets were just canceled?
All 0 of them.
Anyway,
I mean, aside from your mom, of course, but that goes without saying.
Oof. Yep, it's been a while.
Well, I didn't really include her because she's not really a listener.
True, it's true. Anyhow,
and you'll be where? You'll be at DerbyCon?
I'll be at DerbyCon.
Nice.
Yeah, bringing the family actually.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
You're a brave man.
Should be fun. My kids have always wanted to go, and I gotta see if how I can disguise the dog to be.
Cyber Lacey will be there as cosplaying as Chewbacca.
Yes, that's right. No, it's not a dog. It's just a weird person.
No, it's your service animal. It's your cyber detection, cyber.
Oh, that's right. She sniffs bad packets.
That's right. She's a bad packet sniffer. That's right. And by that, she's not a bad sniffer. She sniffs bad packets.
Well,
just to be clear.
Yeah.
So, are you going to teach the kids like some lock picking? And
yeah, actually, I've already taught them lock picking.
You're a brave man.
Yeah.
Let's see what else. Any other conferences you're going to be at soon?
No, don't think so.
So one other interesting note in industry news, I noted that this week, a company I used to work for, Damballa, got bought by Core Security. What's interesting about this is I worked at Damballa for about a year and a half, many, many, many years back, and definitely was a challenging place to work. And they had over $60 million in, I think, 5 different rounds of funding from VCs and such. And they sold for less than $9 million to Core Security.
Oof.
So,
not all the unicorns work out.
No.
You know, I have to say it never really the concept of them never really struck a chord with me. So
I have to be careful about what's ethical and appropriate for me to say, but I will say that there was an interesting detection capability when I was there based on DNS traffic of botnet compromised hosts. The problem that I had when I was there was that was all it was purely a detection technique that didn't have a lot of credibility yet because nobody really believed us because other tools weren't agreeing. And you'd have to do a full forensic analysis to prove it, which is very expensive and time consuming. And two, there was nothing else at the time I was there, and this was 6, 7, 8 years ago. So keep that in mind. This is a while ago. The technology has evolved since then. But there was nothing else we could do. We couldn't stop it. We couldn't fix it. We couldn't tell you how to mitigate it. We couldn't tell you how to remediate it. We couldn't tell you anything other than, hey, that host is hosed.
Right.
And you walk into a Fortune 100 company with that story, and they're like, no, I don't think so. Back in at that time, I think. So the challenge was that, and this was the detection technology that spun out of Georgia Tech, and I think something we see over and over again, a really interesting academic approach to something does not make a business model. So just because you can detect something that isn't enough and doesn't give you enough of a viable business to go and sell to organizations. They want a solution. I know that's an overused, trendy term, but it's true. They want a solution to the problem, not just a problem. Regardless of the fact of how valid it is and how appropriate it is, and they should know this, at the end of the day, businesses are like, well, you're not solving a problem for me. You're giving me a problem that I have to solve.
Yeah. Well, the thing that it always struck me that technology, well, I think it was pretty good. I had some other friends there too. It didn't make sense as a standalone thing.
Correct.
It was always going to be. It was always destined to be part of something else. So
I agree, and I think for lots of reasons that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And without getting into stuff that probably would cause us some legal pain.
Understand.
Just because I don't. As snarky as I can be about vendors and such, at the same time, I also don't want to violate confidences. Yep. And I'm not trying to play that whole, I know something you don't know. It's just, when you see how the dog food is made, there's times that you don't necessarily tell people that.
Yep, I understand. All right, well, that's the show for today. Thanks for listening, everyone. And if you do like the show, give us some love on iTunes. If you don't. You can find links to the stories we talked about today on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Kelt on Twitter at Lurg and me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we'll talk again next week.
See you guys. Have a great week. Bye-bye.